Hello again. I'm here for another profile of yet another BABW badass black woman. And today we're talking about Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. She was born in Baltimore. She was the only child of two free black American parents. She was orphaned, though, at the age of 3, and so she grew up with her uncle and aunt. And her uncle was a heavily involved in literature. He was a strident abolitionist, and he also founded the Watkins Academy for Negro Youth in 1820. So she attended there and got a really good education. She then went to work in a bookshop. She loved books, she loved reading, and she began writing almost immediately. She was in her early 20s when she wrote her first volume of poetry. Now, at age 26, she left Maryland. She started her teaching career, and she taught in a whole number of places. But she began to focus all of her writing on abolition. And she wrote poems that were published in newspapers. She wrote essays. She was in Philadelphia for a while teaching, and she traveled all across the United States and Canada delivering lectures. She was, by all reports, an electrifying speaker. At one point, she said, as a colored woman, have had in this country an education which has made me feel as if I were in the situation of Ishmael, my hand against every man, and every man's hand against me. She also wrote, as I said, a lot of really great poetry. One of her poems, she said, "We soon got used to freedom, though the way at first was rough, but we weathered through the tempest, for the slavery made us tough." She ended up writing a short story called The Two Offers, and it was published in 1859 in the Anglo-African magazine, and therefore she became the very first black American woman to have a short story published. She wrote several novels, including Iola Leroy, which is still read in a lot of college courses. But a lot of what she was known for was for her poems and for her speeches. She wrote a poem that she sent to one of the men who joined John Brown in his raid on Harper's Ferry and was condemned to die. That's one of her most well-known poems. It begins, "Make me a grave where'er you will, in a lonely plain or a lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves." I'm going to read you some of the things that she wrote for her speeches as well, because again, she was a dynamic speaker. One speech that she called "We Are All Bound Together." She said, "We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. You tried that in the case of the Negro. You pressed him down for 2 centuries, and in so doing, you crippled the moral strength and paralyzed the spiritual energies of the white men of the country. When the hands of the black were fettered, white men were deprived of the liberty of speech and the freedom of the press. Society cannot afford to neglect the enlightenment of any class of its members. At the South, the legislation of the country was in behalf of the rich slaveholders, while the poor white man was neglected. I do not believe that giving women the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. I think that, like men, they may be divided into 3 classes: the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good would vote according to their convictions and principles. The bad, as dictated by prejudice or malice. And the indifferent will vote on the strongest side of the question with the winning party. In 1875, she was in Philadelphia, and she gave a speech that was called "The Great Problem to be Solved." Now, 1875, of course, this is after the Civil War is over, and they were just in the throes of deciding what freedom meant, and what were the limitations of freedom. And she said this: "What we need today in the onward march of humanity is a public sentiment in favor of common justice and simple mercy. We have a civilization that has produced grand and magnificent results, diffused knowledge, overthrown slavery, made constant conquests over nature, and built up a wonderful material property. But two things are wanting in American civilization: a keener and deeper, broader and tenderer sense of justice, a sense of humanity, which shall crystallize into the life of the nation the sentiment that justice, simple justice, is the right, not simply of the strong and powerful, but of the weakest and feeblest of all God's children. A deeper and broader humanity, which will teach men to look upon their feeble brethren not as vermin to be crushed out or beasts of burden to be bridled and bitten, but as children of the living God, of that God who we may earnestly hope is in perfect wisdom and in perfect love, working for the best good of all. I'm going to read you one more excerpt from her speeches, but also say she was active her entire life in various social movements. And she, in 1896, along with a number of other women who you might have heard of, like Harriet Tubman, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Mary Church Terrell, helped found the National Federation of African American Women and National League of Colored Women, which combined to create the National Association of Colored Women. She did not just advocate for women's suffrage, but also for black men who were still disenfranchised when she was doing her work. She was an incredible organizer, like so many black women of that period, just an amazing administrator and organizer of all kinds of different movements. In her case, literary movements and a fight for literacy as well. But let me read you one more thing that she wrote. This is from a speech she delivered in 1893 called Women's Political Future, and this was delivered in Chicago for the World's Congress of Representative Women. She said, "As the saffron tints and crimson flushes of morn herald the coming day, so the social and political advancement which woman has already gained bears the promise of the rising of the full-orbed sun of emancipation. The result will be not to make home less happy, but society more holy. Yet I do not think the mere extension of the ballot a panacea for all the ills of our national life. What we need today is not simply more votes, but better voters. Today there are red-handed men in our republic who walk unwhipped of justice, who richly deserve to exchange the ballot of the freeman for the wristlets of the felon. Brutal and cowardly men who torture, burn, and lynch their fellow men, men whose defenselessness should be their best defense, and their weakness an ensign of protection. More than the changing of institutions, we need the development of a national conscience and the upbuilding of national character. Men may boast of the aristocracy of blood, may glory in the aristocracy of talent, and be proud of the aristocracy of wealth. But there is one aristocracy which must ever outrank them all, and that is the aristocracy of character. And it is the women of a country who help to mold its character and to influence, if not determine, its destiny. And in the political future of our nation, women will not have done what she could if she doesn't endeavor to have our republic stand foremost among the nations of the earth. If knowledge is power, ignorance is also power. The power that educates wickedness may manipulate and dash against the pillars of any state when they are undermined and honeycombed by injustice." Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, a badass black woman. Have a great day, and as always, be kind.